Hello again, as you know, I am Eli the Computer Guy, and today's class is an introduction to the Buffalo TeraStation. Now, some of you guys may be looking at this and you're probably shaking your heads and going, Eli, why did you sell out? We want classes about Linux, and we want classes about Windows. We want classes about real pieces of technology, not things like Buffalo TeraStations. Well, the reality is now in the modern world that these are as significant for you as a professional in the IT world as things like Windows and Linux and so forth were in the past. So back in the day, like 10 years ago, you could go out and you could buy NAS devices from companies like Buffalo for however much money. And basically what they were inexpensive file servers. And essentially you got what you paid for, right? If you went out and you spent $200 or $300 on one of these NAS devices that they had at the time, you got a file server that was useful for about 2 people using it at any one time. You know what I'm saying? It was basically like putting a hard drive onto your network to be able to share files and folders, and that was about it. They were slow. They were quirky as hell. They died if you sneezed on them. They just weren't really that good. And so, back 10 years ago, if you wanted a real file server, if you wanted a real server, you would go out and you would buy or build a Windows server, or you would build a Linux server and go from there. You would not go out and buy a Buffalo NAS for your network. You just wouldn't, unless it was an incredibly small network with an incredibly small budget, and you didn't really like your clients that much, to be honest with you, right? But again, time moves on, time keeps going, and as time and technology changes, these little devices have changed too. No longer is it the days when you go out and buy a Buffalo NAS or a QNAP or a Synology basically as an inexpensive option, but now these are real full-fledged servers that perform most of the functions that most businesses need now. So if we're looking at this TeraStation, right, this TeraStation obviously can be used as a file server. It also can be used as a web server. So it has the full LAMP stack on there. It has PHP. It has MySQL. So you could run it as a web server. It also has iSCSI. So if you want to use this as a virtualization target, you can do that. Not only that, but these things now have failover and high availability. So basically you can connect 2 of these, and if one of them physically fails, the other one will stay up and running. Therefore, you have services on the network. So what you have to realize with these little guys is this is not a replacement for Server 2012. This is not a replacement for a highly configured Linux server. But the reality is does your client or does your office need a high-powered 2012 server or a highly configured Linux server? In reality, they probably need file sharing, maybe a web server, maybe high availability, and that's what you get in a package like this. The other thing that is that's come about in the modern world of dealing with these devices, and why I'm going to be doing this class with you guys today, is that the operating systems they are now using for these types of things are now standardized for the different manufacturers. So again, if you're dealing with Buffalo, Buffalo has their specific NAS operating system for these TeraStations. So whether you use this TeraStation or the 8-bay TeraStation or a different TeraStation, you're basically going to be dealing with the same operating system. The same is true with QNAP, the same is true with Synology, that basically these are the same operating systems across the line. Why that's important for you is when you decide to standardize on whatever NAS or server you want to standardize on for your company, you don't have to worry about your employees or your staff having to learn a zillion different interfaces. Basically, if you standardize on Buffalo, all of the TeraStations are essentially going to look and work the same, whether you buy this one or the more expensive version, right? So that is one of those things that you have to think about in the modern world of NAS and all of these servers. So the introductory class today, we're going to take you through all of the different things with this little guy. I've been playing with it for a while now. And again, if you look at this, it is a nice little robust box that I think for most situations is actually what you need. And in the modern world of simplicity, having a little box like this where you don't have to worry about viruses, you don't have to worry about doing a lot of updates, you don't have to worry about a lot of things you have to worry about with a normal Windows server, I think is a real benefit. So this class is Introduction to the Buffalo TeraStation. If you hold on a second, we'll dive in. So the first thing that we need to look at whenever we're going to be buying a server of any type, whether it's something like this Buffalo TeraStation or whether it's a license for Windows Server 2012, is we have to figure out what it is we want, what do we need in our environment, and then we have to pick the right product to go along with that. This is an important thing, even in the Windows Server world, making sure you purchase the right license. Certain licenses allow you to do certain things, and if you don't buy the appropriate license, you simply don't have the functionality, right? And so this is especially true whenever you're going to be buying anything like the Buffalo TeraStation, is you have to go in and you have to make sure that you're buying the right thing. There is a reason why one of them costs $100 more than the other one. So if you try to go the cheap route, you might find out, oh, I don't have that bit of functionality that I actually need. So let's go over to the Buffalo website just so I can give you an idea of what the different options look like when you're looking for one of these TeraStation. So we're over here on my computer, and basically you can just go to buffalotech.com, and you go to products, and then you go down to their NAS devices, and they have multiple different NAS devices. Now the important thing to realize is that they do have different versions of their NAS, and so they have the home and small office. These are what are called the link stations, and these are basically what I would consider, the old versions of the NAS devices. Essentially, these are hard drives with network cards. If you know what you're doing, if you just want a little backup solution, fine, whatever, buy one. I would basically stay away from these guys. This is not what we're looking for in a business environment. What we want to do is we want to go over and click on this professional and business class, and this is where we come to the TeraStation. So again, important to remember, different names for different things. Home is link station, professional and business is TeraStation. So do make sure you buy the right one. Then from here, of course, they have different versions. TeraStation, TeraStation 1000, 3000, 5000, 7000. And then you go through here and you figure out what it is you need, and then you purchase that particular product. So capacity, 4 to 16 terabytes, all the way up to 72 terabytes. They have desktop versions, rack mount versions. They talk about how many drives. So TeraStation 1000, 2 or 4 drives, 4 drives. The TeraStation 5000. So what I'm showing you guys today is this TeraStation 5000. So they have desktop versions. You can do 2, 4, 6, or 8 drives, or the rack mount with 4. So again, this is important to think about. What do you need in the future? You're going to go and you're going to buy one of these, or if you go out and buy one of these things, you may think, oh, the 6 bay one costs however much more than the 2 bay one. I'm just going to buy the 2 bay one. Well, the question is how are you going to grow that NAS in the future? What are you going to do? One of the interesting things with these TeraStations is it actually has LVM. You can use a logical volume manager in that. So if you only have 2 drives, you really can't use LVM efficiently. I suppose you could. You could. I'm not going to, or you know what I'm saying? Like if you're going to do LVM for expanding and shrinking volumes, you would want like 4 or 8 bays so that you actually have enough storage space in there to be able to do that, so that you can grow or shrink the volume size. Again, one of those things to think about. Then we come down here to CPUs, 800 megahertz up to the Intel Atom 2.13 gigahertz. This is going to matter for things like when you're doing virtualization, if you're doing SAN support, so it's just something to think about. Then we come down here and we take a look at the software system. So you'll notice here, and this is why I'm doing the class, is they all use the TeraStation NAS system. So no matter which one of these you buy, you're still going to be dealing with the same operating system. Of course, we come down here to RAM. That all depends upon the resources, basically the load you're going to be putting on this thing. The interesting thing then comes under here. We have things for replication. So replication, being able to replicate the data between multiple TeraStations. So again, if you're going to be dumping terabytes of data onto anything, how the hell are you going to back it up? Where is the redundancy? So the fact that they have replication is a nice thing, but then you can come down, you can see they have device failover. So that's what I like about these TeraStation 5000s. So if if you configure 2 of these TeraStations together, they synchronize the data, and if one fails, the other one stays up and running, and so you have services on your network. So again, even with a little file server, wouldn't that be nice if you had complete redundancy and reliability for your file server? So even if the file server failed, your end users didn't know. You could just walk in the morning with your cup of coffee, sip your cup of coffee, go, ah, crap, I got to buy a new TeraStation. Okay. And then like 3 days later, you get the TeraStation in the mail, you plug in the drives, you reconfigure it, and away you go. That you can have a massive hardware failure, and your users wouldn't even know. So that's one of the things to think about with the failover. You're going to be doing iSCSI support, so the virtualization and all that. That is something to look at. So obviously the TeraStation 1000 doesn't have that. Then we come out down here to video surveillance management. So I'm going to be doing a class on using access cameras. And so that's something to look at. So with the TeraStation 5000, it gives you up to 16 cameras. TeraStation 7000 goes up to 50. This may not matter to you. If you're not doing surveillance cameras, who the hell cares? If you are doing surveillance cameras, this is very important. And then antivirus support. So again, one of the nice parts with these little the TeraStations is they can actually scan all the files on the system using Trend Micro to scan to see if there are viruses. So that's one of the nice things, and this is where you see whether or not there is functionality. So this is all the kind of stuff that you have to look at whenever you're going to be buying any servers. I don't care whether it's a TeraStation or, again, Server 2012. You have to think about, what are you actually going to be using this server for? What are the requirements for the server? And then make sure you match the requirements with what you purchase. Not only should you match the requirements with what you purchase, but you should also match the requirements with what you think you will need or what you may need. Again, migration is the most expensive, horrible, nasty thing you can do as a technician. That is what is always horrible. So what you have to think about is, when you're buying a TeraStation, when you're buying one of these things, can I spend $200 more now just as a safety measure so that if I need more in the future, I'm not going to have to migrate to a whole new system? Again, if you're looking at something like this and you're thinking, well, Eli, I only need 4 terabytes of storage. I'll just buy one of these little two bay servers. It'll be fine. I don't want to spend an extra $200. But the question is what happens if a year down the road you realize you don't need 4 terabytes of storage, you need 16 terabytes of storage, right? Wouldn't it be nice to simply go out and buy a couple of extra hard drives and shove them in, do a couple of configurations, and be done? Versus if you haven't spent that extra money, then you have to go out, you have to buy a whole new system. You then have to migrate the data from one system to the other. Then you have to replicate the configurations. Then you have to do all of those other changes. You know, is it better just to spend the extra $200 now versus, you know, dealing with all of that pain in the future? That's one of the things I really want you guys thinking about as professionals. So let's go over to a little demo table before we get more into this. Again, just so I can kind of give you an idea of what this thing physically looks like when you start to deal with it. So this is what the Buffalo TeraStation 5000 looks like with 2 bays. So if we pop this open, we can get an idea of what we're dealing with here. So this is my hand size, and so you can see it's about a hand size all the way around. So it's a little bit of mass here, but this is not very big. You definitely don't need a large area to store this thing. It's got the hot swappable drives here. So if you look at these, I mean, these slide in and out very nicely. Of course, Buffalo makes very high quality equipment, so it's nice to see that all that works. Basically, you've got a display. I'll show you in the next section. We've got a power button. We've got, you know, function and all that kind of stuff. But it's all basically pretty simple. You've got the little locking mechanism on the front. You know, for whatever reason you're worried about locking up the hard drives in the computer, that's there. We can then flip this around, and we see we've got some more options on the back. Again, this has more in common with a full-fledged server than it does with those crappy old little NAS devices of 10 years ago, and it really shows on the back. So we've got the connection to UPS support, so you can connect the UPS in there to have communication. We have USB 3.0 ports and USB 2.0 ports on the back of here. So this is for the backup system. So I'll show you when we go into the configurations. You can actually have this thing back up to something else. So you could connect this to, you know, external hard drives to do specific backups, that type of thing. So that's there. And then we have the 2 gig NIC cards. So these, you can either set them up to be independent so that they have 2 different IP addresses. They can plug into different networks. Or you can actually do NIC teaming, which is pretty cool. And it actually works pretty well, at least from what I saw from the load I put under it. It seemed to work pretty well. Where you basically connect these, as far as the TeraStation is concerned, they're one network card. So if one port fails, the other port will keep working, and you won't see any drop. You won't see any problems. If the other port fails, the one keeps working. So that's a very nice thing that they have in these little TeraStations. So it's something to think about. Got a little MAC addresses and a little power supply and all that. You see you got a little fan on here. What I will say is this particular unit is not silent, but it's also very quiet. Again, one of the things you guys want to be thinking about whenever you're going to be buying servers and putting them into your business environment is how loud is it, right? I've done server classes for you guys before. Back when I had 1U servers around, I actually turned on the 1U servers and I showed you how loud they are, that they sound like damn Hoovers. And so that's an important thing to think about whenever you're going to be putting these devices or servers into your office environment is how loud are they. So this thing, I mean, basically sounds like a little fan. So it's not silent, but it's relatively quiet. But that is something to think about, like, because I've seen that where I have actually had clients who wanted me to put full-fledged 1U servers into the same office that their secretary was in. And then I turned them on and they realized their secretary would lose their mind, right? So this is basically what we're dealing with. We're dealing with the TeraStation, like I say. So this is Buffalo's idea of what one of these NAS, file server type server should look like. The big thing I really want you to think about in this modern world of computers, though, is the fact that the same operating system basically runs across all of these different models. So you figure out which model you want, you purchase it. But again, the nice part with this is then your employees, you can teach your employees how to configure one of these, and then they'll know how to configure all of them if you standardize on one particular type of NAS device. So with that, now we're going to start digging in and seeing all of the cool little configurations and what you can do with this stuff. So now that we have an idea of what the TeraStation is and what it does, we can go and we can start taking a look at the actual configuration so that we can set it up as a real server. Now, what I like with all these modern little NAS server devices is the fact that they have a display, and as long as you have DHCP enabled, when you first set these things up, they will grab an IP address and it will tell you what the hell the IP address is. I personally think all DHCP enabled equipment should simply have a little IP address display on it, but unfortunately not all of them do. So the nice part with this is it does have that. You just have to wait till it scrolls around, and when you see it, you can go, okay, I know what IP address I need to go to. So in order to configure the TeraStation, it's like most of these devices now where it's a web GUI interface. So all we do is we come over to the computer and we see that the IP address for this thing is 192.168.1.15. So we just plug that in, and we get the nice little GUI interface here. So we get the Buffalo TeraStation. It gives us a little warning about compatibility. And now I am logged in. So normally there'd be a little logged in screen, but I guess I'm already logged in. And this gives us our configuration page. So we can see it starts us on the file sharing page. So it gives us some file sharing stuff we'll take a look at in a minute. It goes to drives. It goes to different services, web services, applications, network backup, and basic management. So these are all the configurations that you can deal with the TeraStation. And as we go through these, again, I'll show you where, I mean, this stuff just does what most small businesses or what most remote offices need. They don't need really powerful, insanely complex servers. They just need some of this basic support. So let's take a look at file sharing to begin with. So right here, this is the file sharing. So the folders on the computer, we can see we have this thing for folder setup. All you do in order to change configurations is you click on this little box here, and it shows us what's going on. So currently we have two shares here. We have share and we have TM NAS. We can see that they're part of the volume array 1. We can see some different information here. We can click on more details. So if we click on this, might give us a little more stuff. We can click on the share thing itself and it will give us some more information. So read write attribute, recycle bin enabled, LAN protocol support is SMB and AFP right now, folder attributes, so on and so forth. If we want to be able to change this, all we do is we click this and we're able to change. So Server, overall, I found the server is pretty quick with most things, but it slows down every once in a while. So this gives us the name. Then we can go to volume. So it's on array 1, so that's where the volume is located. The attributes, is it read only or read and write? Recycle bin, do you want that enabled or disabled? This is a very important thing for the shares, which is very interesting, where you're able to say what protocols can connect to the share. So SMB, this is the normal Windows file sharing protocol. Whenever you drag and drop between PCs or servers in the Windows world, it uses the SMB protocol. AFP is the Apple file protocol, that's for Macs. But then there's FTP, there's DLNA, SFTP, NFS, backup, web access. So you can decide here which one of these different protocols are able to get to the share. We can go down here, we can take offline files. So do you want caching to be possible? So if somebody goes to this server and then they're offline at a later time and can't get to the server, do you want those files to be able to be cached? Then there's virus scan, we'll show you this in a few minutes, the ability to actually scan all the files. You know, do you want real-time scanning, scheduled scanning, manual scan? This type of configuration here is going to depend upon the load on this little file server. If you've got 5 people using this file server to swap, you know, a few files, then you want things like real-time scan because you're not really putting a huge load on the server. On the other hand, if you're hammering the hell out of this little TeraStation, you probably don't want to do real-time scanning because, remember, it only has a little Atom processor in it with 2 gigs of RAM. So the more you require of it, the harder it's going to be. Then access restrictions. Do you want to be able to restrict who is able to go here or not? This gives us, you know, the local usernames, read, write permission, no permission. There's also groups. So all that stuff is there. Do you want to discard changes? Yes. Basically, if you want to create a folder, all you have to do is you just click on the create a folder and you go through all of those different settings and you figure out, you know, what you want this particular folder to do. So you can just cancel out of that and close there. We then go to users. So, you know, the important thing with any modern server is it has users and groups. So if we click on users, we can take a look at the users. So guest, the administrator, I created a little test account, so we can click on this. We can do edit, and it gives us different information here. So we have the username for this account, an email address, a password if we want. The interesting thing that I like with these new NAS units you can buy is the ability to put quotas in. So I can put a quota for this particular user to say, you know, how much storage the person is able to get. So quota alert capacity, when should they be emailed? Quota capacity, you know, when can they no longer put any data in there? So that can be a very useful thing in a modern environment. And then, of course, there's groups. So this is where you go in and you can put the user into a different group if you want. So we just go that, and then we can close out of that. Then we go down to groups, and groups are groups. You know, whether you're dealing with Windows or Linux, so you can create different groups, and you can put different users into those groups, and then give permissions for the groups. So the standard practice, remember, whenever you're doing security in a server world, is you give permissions to groups, and then you put users into groups. Generally, unless you're dealing with a ridiculously small environment, you don't give individual users rights and permissions. Because that makes it a nightmare for administration. If you've got 100 different users and you're dealing with the permissions for 100 different users, that's a pain in the butt. If you have 100 different users that you can dump and do 5 different groups, it's a hell of a lot easier to deal with permissions and security for 5 groups than it is 100 individual users, if that makes sense. So, you know, it's got all the little group stuff here, and then we can go down and we can look at the different file sharing protocols and decide whether we want them turned on. So SMB for Windows, DFS, AFP, FTP, SFTP, web access, and NFS. So all you have to do is you can either turn them on or off, and then you can configure them. So you can just click on this. You know, it gives you all the information here, and you can decide, you know, SMB2 protocol, whether it's disabled, permission, OS, so on and so forth. So this is what we're looking at with the file sharing, and it basically gives you all of this different access here, which is nice. Then from there we go down to drives. So in the drives, this is where we're going to be dealing with the individual hard drives in this particular server. So all we have to do is we click on the configuration thing, and we can take a look at the hard drives that are in the system. So we can see disk 1 and we can see disk 2. We can see the status, so they're in an array. So the array is an arrayed array. So we can see the array, and we can see that it's normal. We can see the unit capacity. So what we're looking at here is array 1. Array 1 is the RAID array. Disk 1 and disk 2 are in the RAID array. So we can see the unit capacity. So disk 1 has 900 gigs. Disk 2 has 900 gigs. They are in an array, and basically they have 899.9 gigs for that array. So that's the storage we're dealing with. The amount used, so it shows us the amount used, the file system XFS, so on and so forth. You can go up here, you can do things like format disks or check disks. So we can close that. Then if you're dealing with the RAID, you come down here to actually deal with the RAID. So here we can see that we have this RAID, array 1 mode, RAID 1, so disk mirroring, status normal. We can take a look at what's going on here. We can click on this, and it will give us some more options about the array. We can see the different disks. We can delete the array if we want. We can just click cancel. If we go over to options, that'll give us some other options. Oops. We can go over to options, error behavior, don't shut down, boot with SCSI service, check speed, so on and so forth. So we can just click out of that. Then they have this interesting thing called RAID scanning. So you can turn on RAID scanning, and if you turn on RAID scanning, what it will do is it will actually scan the RAID to see if there are any problems, if there are any failures on the RAID. So this can be a very useful thing. So again, you guys know, anybody that's followed me for a long time, I hate RAID with a passion. I would rather have a good backup system, and I would really rather have a better high availability system. But I dislike RAID generally because a lot of times you can run into weird little problems. One of the things that I actually had a CEO I was talking with before was very interesting, where he was talking about he had a disk mirroring RAID on one of his servers, and literally one of the hard drives became corrupt, and then it mirrored the corruption. Not even joking. So those are the things you have to worry about. And so with the RAID maintenance setting, it'll actually go in and scan through the RAID and see if there's any issues and try to fix that. So that's something you might want to turn on. They then also have the ability for LVM, Logical Volume Manager. This is something that you'll be used to if you're with the Linux world. Basically, this allows you to expand or contract volumes. Basically, what this means is you can then add hard drives or swap hard drives. So basically, you can add hard drives, you can expand the volume, and then you can shrink the volume and pull old hard drives out. So LVM is very useful in a Linux server world. What I will warn you, though, is whether or not you use LVM, I would argue, depends on which particular TeraStation that you're using. For this little 2-bay guy, I would not touch LVM for the world. I think it would just be an effing nightmare to try to do LVM on a 2-bay server. So that is just one of those things to think about. But they do have the option here within the operating system. And then, of course, we go down to iSCSI. So this allows you to use this as a hypervisor target in order to do virtualization and such. So that is something you can turn on, you can configure. Past that, we can go down, we can take a look at the services. So DLNA server, iTunes server, Squeezebox server is this weird Logitech thing. You can set it up as a print server, you can set it up as a web server, you can set it up as a MySQL server. If we click on the configurations, we can see what the target folder is. So we can say where we want the target folder to be. We can click on edit. So we can browse to a different folder if we want, and then we can say what port we want this to be on. We can click OK. Then we can also, when we open this up, we can actually edit the php.ini file. So this gives you all the power for dealing with your web server and your PHPINI, which most of you guys need. I know a lot of you guys are looking at this and like, Eli, it's not a real web server. And again, it's like, dude, if it does what you need done, I would argue it's a real web server. I mean, if it gives you access to PHPINI, basically what most people need is they need an Apache web server that gives them PHPINI and a MySQL database. If it does that, that's really all most people need. But it gives you all this. You can go in there, you can configure that if you want. We close out of here, and then we can do the MySQL server. So if we click on this, we can go in. It tells you where the folder of the MySQL server is stored, the port that it's running on. We can then actually open PHPMyAdmin. So PHPMyAdmin, this is the GUI interface for dealing with MySQL. So it's how most people deal with MySQL, and it gives you it. And as you can see, it runs very quickly. Now, the one warning that I will give you, and this was really foolish. I don't know if it's this particular version of the TeraStation that I got. But I was having a lot of failures trying to open up PHPMyAdmin and all that. And the reason is the data folder here was not configured. So when I first got this and was first setting this up, the data folder database, there was nothing here at all. So I actually had to go and browse. And so I browsed to the TM NAS folder and then set it up as that way. So if you're having issues setting up, for some reason like the MySQL database isn't working, make sure your database folder is configured. Because again, you'd think you would think that this would be set up by default, at least for the one that I got in my hand. That was not set up for default, so just make sure with that. And we go through here, you know, no changes. So you get all of these different services, and like I say, I mean, you get a file server, you get a print server, you get a web server. So that's what most people need. Past that, we go down to web services. So we've got web remote access, and you've also got Amazon S3, so you can configure this to work with Amazon S3. Again, that might be something you need for, you know, backup solutions and all that kind of stuff. So we just click on this. Then we can go in and we can edit and we can, you know, bucket names and all that kind of stuff. So that's a nice thing, like if you need offsite backup or if you need to pull information in off the cloud. From that, we can come down to applications, BitTorrent, TeraSearch. This is the surveillance cameras. So we'll do a class using Axis cameras later, but you can configure this to use surveillance cameras. And then the other nice thing that this thing has is the antivirus configuration. So again, it's set up for a Trend Micro has a NAS service. And so you can purchase that NAS antivirus service for however many dollars per year and configure that here. I mean, that's just a nice little way, you know, just a nice little way to have a little bit more security on your network. So that's a nice thing to have. Past that, we go down here to networking. Networking, we take a look at the IP addresses, workgroup domain. So this can deal with Active Directory. So if you're dealing with permissions, so that's the thing. Like you're like, Eli, I'm in a real network. Eli, I'm in a real network. I can't deal with none of these crappy TeraStations. I have real 2012 servers. Well, that's fine. Keep your 2012 servers for Active Directory and all that, but then dump a few of these little guys in your remote offices simply, again, as local file servers. If you're not having to push and pull big-ass files over your WAN connection, that's always a nice thing, I would argue. Port trunking, I'll show you in a second. Service port restrictions, SNMP if you want to use it, and you can ping. This is basically just a little troubleshooting thing. But we can go in here, we can take a look at IP addresses. We've only got one interface connected right now, so we can say it's bonded. I'll show you that in a second. It shows you what the IP address is, the subnet mask, frame size, all that kind of stuff. You know, that's the normal thing you guys are used to. The interesting part, what I really like though, is we go down here to port trunking, and this is where we can do that teaming. And so if we go into port group, we can see LAN port 1 and LAN port 2 are connected together, and therefore, as I say, if one port fails, the other port keeps up and running, and I can say from using this, the end user doesn't notice, at least under a reasonable amount of resources. Now, they have the different trunking port modes, round robin, active backup, XOR, broadcast, blah, blah, blah. This is the type of thing, the round robin seems to work fine. If you're worried about these other ones, just take a look at what they are, do a little research. Let's see, cancel, but that's really nice for failover and reliability. Again, we can go into this whole work group thing, we can edit. You know, workgroup, NT domain, or Active Directory. So that's very useful to have. And then SNMP, if anybody's still using that simple network management protocol, so that this can communicate what's going on. Then we have the backup solution. So backup is very nice with this. Again, if you're going to be having any kind of server, I don't care what kind of server it is, what happens if everything goes boom? Like, no, seriously, what happens if everything goes boom? So with this, they have the backup solution. So this is your standard backup solution. So you can have this backup to a USB hard drive if you want, or another NAS or whatever. That's just a standard backup. Then you have replication. So replication is where you can configure this to completely replicate with another TeraStation. So if we go here, we take a look at edit, we can go and add, and basically if we had another TeraStation on the network, we could have this thing replicate with it. So that's good. I would argue replication is how you really want to do backups. I mean, backup is fine, but if you can replicate that is better than a backup, right? Because that's actually replicating the data as it is. And then you have failover. So unfortunately, I don't have a second TeraStation, so I can't play with this. But basically what failover means is as we look here, if failover occurs, the backup TeraStation will replace the main device, taking the place on the network using the network information, hostname, IP address, subnet mask, default gateway, DNS, from the service IP address and its memory. Blah, 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 blah. So what's nice about this, and this is what you should be thinking about for your environment, is again, whenever we think about failures on servers, whenever we think about failures on computers, we're thinking about viruses or configurations or any of that. What happens when the power supply fails, right? What happens when the CPU fails? What happens when Bill Gates has a headache and for some reason it just blows up for some stupid ass reason, right? Even if you know how to fix it, even if I look at it and go, okay, even, if your server fails and it's simply a power supply and all you need to do is swap the power supply, you have to make sure you have a power supply. If you don't have a power supply, you have to go get a power supply. Then you have to pull the server apart. Then you have to put the power supply in. So even if something as simple, as utterly simple as a power supply failure happens, you're looking at least 2 hours of downtime. At least, and I'm being nice, right? I'm being so polite when I say 2 hours of downtime for a power supply. We're not talking about anything big deal. We're talking about power supply. So the question is can your business deal with that downtime? So it's a nice thing, being able to have this failover for not very much money. For how much these TeraStations cost, if one of them fails, like I say, it will simply fail over to the other one. Your end users don't even know anything happens. And then you can replace the other unit. Again, you can just, grab your cup of coffee, go to newegg.com, order a new TeraStation, get it in the mail in 3 days, and not worry about anything. Failover in the modern IT infrastructure, failover is the modern version of backup systems. So back in like 2000, if you didn't have a good backup system, you're a complete idiot. I would argue in the modern world, you should have failover. The entire physical box should be able to go boom, and your users shouldn't even know, right? That is what I would argue. Then we've got Time Machine, and then we got the ability to do direct copy, so that's there. And then, of course, if we scroll down, we have the normal management stuff, name languages, email notifications, log, sleep timer, UPS, sync, restore erase, update, SSL, and notification. So this is basically what we're looking at when we're looking at these TeraStations. And as I can say, it's a very, very powerful little box. It gives you a lot of stuff in this relatively small form factor. So that's really all there is to these little TeraStations. Obviously, there's more configurations and a few more things we can do, such as that failover and replication, but I've only got one of them, you know what I'm saying? Now, again, I know a lot of you guys are going to be looking at this and you're going to be like, Eli, you're selling out, you're going to have some stupid crap you guys are going to be complaining about for some reason. But what I really want you to think about is, again, like I say, in this modern world, a lot of people still want their systems local. A lot of people still don't want cloud systems. They don't want to deal with all of that. On the other hand, they don't need the complexity of Server 2012. Again, I'm a Server 2012 fanboy. I may hate Windows 8, and I may still be rather pissed about the whole micro-stop thing, but Windows Server 2012 is really an amazing server operating system. It also costs a lot of money. It also needs a lot of care and feeding. It also needs a lot of stuff. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you need to build a real infrastructure, if you're going to have, if you're thinking about having 5 to 10 servers that are going to be providing services on your network, then you look at Windows Server 2012. Then the price point and all of that makes sense. But, if you're dealing with a small environment, or if you're dealing with a simple environment, do you really want to be dealing with CALs, right? Client access licenses, paying for that from Microsoft? Do you really want to have to be worried about all the Windows updates and all of that kind of thing? Do you want to have to worry about, one of your employees going in and surfing porn on your server? I've seen happen. Do you want to worry about that stuff? Or do you just want to buy a nice little box and shove it in? On the other hand, too, you might be saying, well, Eli, Windows isn't the entire world. We can just build a Linux. I can just build Linux file servers. But again, then one of the things you have to be thinking about in any kind of real business environment is that the more time that your employees or your technicians are spending on any problem, the more it costs you, and the more that they can't be doing something else. So when you start using things like Linux servers. Linux servers are fine and great. I use Linux servers. Don't start giving me crap about that. But a lot of times when Linux servers get configured and they get built in many different variations. So you may have a CentOS here, and you may have a Fedora here, and you may have an Ubuntu here. And the problem is as a technician sits down to start working on the system, you know, maybe they're brilliant at Ubuntu, but they haven't worked on OS in a few years, and so they're like, crap, what am I supposed to say, yum, right? Well, while they're sitting there trying to figure out how to mess with a system, that's time being wasted. If you standardize on some kind of little box like this, that can actually save you money. Like if you're going to be going out, like if you have a consulting business, you're doing maintenance contracts, you standardize all your clients on one type of NAS device. And I'm not trying to sell that. I'm showing you guys this. But it could be QNAP. It could be Synology. It could be something else. But you standardize on one of these types of boxes, and then your employees always know what they're dealing with. If you send your technician to this client, he'll understand how to deal with the client. If you send the technician to this client, she'll understand how to deal with it. You don't have to worry about them getting up to speed every time they go to a client site, because all your client sites basically look the same. So that's what we're looking at whenever we're dealing with things like these little NAS, these little servers. And again, as I'll say, these nice little guys are powerful. I know you look at it, it has an Atom processor with 2 gigs of RAM. Again, even for me, that doesn't seem like quite enough resources, but for what it's doing, it's realistically more than enough, depending on what environment you're going into. So that's one of the things you have to think about with these little guys is, you know, what environment are you going to put it into? Is it going to get the hell hammered out of it? You know, this can be a web server, and it'll be a great web server, and if you have 100 visitors a day or 1,000 visitors a day, it should be fine. If you're going to have 100,000 visitors a day, again, go buy a better web server. As far as Buffalo as a company and this type of equipment goes, I've used Buffalo for many years. I was actually using Buffalo networking equipment before they got into the lawsuit where they weren't able to sell wireless equipment for about a year. So Buffalo is kind of like Spiceworks and some of these other companies that I have had experience with these guys all the way back from my consulting days, and I can say all the products that I've dealt with Buffalo are good quality things. Again, as long as you put them into the right environments. What I would where I kind of niche, I fit Buffalo type equipment into is in small and mid-size office infrastructure environments. So I'm not going to use this in a really complicated setup. That's an important thing, again, what you're going to use. Maybe I might use a QNAP or a Synology in a more complicated setup. I'm going to use this in a pretty simple world. You know, I have 50 surveillance cameras that have to dump data day in, day out somewhere. Buffalo is great, right? I need a file server or a basic web server with failover protection. You know, Buffalo is great. So that's one of the things like I want you to think about when you're looking at these guys is these Buffalo equipment, whether it's this or whether it's their networking equipment or any of that kind of stuff, this is the kind of stuff you shove into your closet, you spend 2 hours configuring it the first time, and then you walk away. And you really, I would argue, you really don't mess with it until you come back and swap everything out 5 years from now. And so that is where I would fit this kind of stuff in. And that's the kind of thing, though, I really do want you guys thinking about whenever you're buying this equipment, is because NAS isn't NAS, isn't NAS, isn't NAS, as I just said. You know, Buffalo shares a lot of the features and functionalities of QNAP and Synology. I would not quite put Buffalo in the same place. Right? If I'm looking at QNAP, which is much more expensive, and I realize I don't need a 10 gig Ethernet port on my NAS, then I can say, well, if I don't really need a 10 gig Ethernet port, maybe this less expensive Buffalo will work fine. If on the other hand, it's like, no, I need a 10 gig port and this and that and the other thing, then you might look at different types of equipment. But yeah. That is, like I said, I've been playing with this. This isn't a review, but I do like this little TeraStation. And I would say, like I say, if you take a look at all the low configurations, I think it will do very well for most of the environments that you'll be dealing with. So as always, I am Eli the Computer Guy. This was Introduction to the Buffalo TeraStation. As always, I enjoyed teaching you guys and look forward to seeing you at the next one.